In all my years at EPA, I've never seen any instance where politics has gotten more in the way of good science being applied to public health than in the case of fluoride.
It was a foolish thing to do years ago. They didn't have enough information. They hadn't really been tested.
Oh, it would be very difficult for NIH or public health to admit a mistake. We've essentially been exposing people in this country for years. And the situation may be that we, in fact, may have been causing many health problems that we are having to put up with today.
Unfortunately, the attacks on those questioning the safety of fluoridated water are not limited to the average Joe. Even top academics publishing in esteemed medical journals recognize that the topic has become politicized and are effectively being censored by their peers. One paper examining the controversial topic came out in early 2020, titled "The Evolving Science of Fluoride: When New Evidence Doesn't Conform with Existing Beliefs." The authors state, over the past 75 years, health authorities have declared that community water fluoridation, a practice that reaches over 400 million worldwide, is safe. Yet, studies conducted in North America examining the safety of fluoride exposure in pregnancy were non-existent. The tendency to ignore new evidence that does not conform to widespread beliefs impedes the response to early warnings about fluoride as a potential developmental neurotoxin. People who question the safety of water fluoridation are quickly dismissed as zealots or anti-science fanatics. Indeed, some scientists dismissed our funding application with comments such as, "This study is not needed. We know that fluoride is safe." But we forged ahead. Shouldn't claims about safety be based on evidence? We expected our study would reignite the debate about the safety of water fluoridation, but we didn't expect we would be at the crossfire of this political and polarized debate. Vitriolic comments and claims with little scientific basis, such as the results are driven by outliers, were made by the American Council on Science and Health and the UK-based Science Media Center, both heavily funded by the pharmaceutical and food and beverage industries. We presented our findings at an international meeting held in Ottawa. We were nervous about how the results would be received by the audience, which included members from Health Canada and other public health agencies. Afterwards, someone approached me and said, "Congratulations, you've just sabotaged your career before it even started." It is abundantly clear that water fluoridation is a golden child of industry, government, and academia, an unquestionable fixture in modern public health resembling a religion. It's important to keep this in mind when discussing the topic. The powers that be are actively censoring and dismissing information suggesting it might be harmful. After all, they kind of have to. What are they going to say to people? "Oh yeah, that fluoride we've been dumping into the water the last half century that we said was safe, turns out it's a toxin. Sorry guys." With all that being said, let's get into how ingesting fluoride can potentially be a hazard. Many of the animal studies showing widespread systemic risks of fluoride consumption are criticized by the academic establishment because they are typically administering fluoride at higher doses than the amount that is present in water. However, this ignores a few key points. First, there have been animal studies documenting adverse cognitive changes at lower concentrations. For example, this paper giving pregnant rodents just 5 parts per million of sodium fluoride in their water produced central nervous system abnormalities in their offspring, which were consistent with exposure to toxins like aluminum and arsenic. Second, the concentration of fluoride in the blood induced in these animal models is actually right in line with what we see in humans long-term who are exposed to even low levels of fluoride. The WHO has set its water fluoride limit at 1.5 parts per million, while the United States' EPA says it's okay at concentrations up to 4 parts per million. The CDC's manual for testing plasma fluoride levels states, "There are no known adverse health effects associated with low plasma fluoride levels, which typically range from 0.5 to 4.0 micromolar per liter, or around 0.01 to 0.08 parts per million." Studies have shown that individuals exposed to so-called low levels of fluoride can have plasma concentrations even higher. Then if we look at an animal study, exposing animals to a ridiculous 125 parts per million of fluoridated water for 6 weeks caused their plasma fluoride to jump to around 0.1 parts per million. The higher plasma levels of fluoride a person had, the greater risk of developing dental fluorosis. So it looks like the level of fluoride in the bloodstream is representative of how much builds up in our tissues. The reason water is fluoridated to begin with is so that it can accumulate in your tissues, specifically your bones and teeth, which the public health authorities will happily admit and tout as a good thing. What they won't tell you is that the buildup of fluoride in these tissues also results in higher release of fluoride into the blood, meaning the rest of the body gets proportionally exposed to it. They also won't tell you that it can build up in various other organs, most notably the brain. The developing fetus is particularly susceptible to fluoride accumulation in the brain, likely due to the still developing blood-brain barrier. However, even adults growing up in areas of endemic fluorosis have shown fluoride accumulation in cerebrospinal fluid, indicating that it can indeed cross the barrier with enough exposure. By the way, the most recent data in the United States showed evidence of fluorosis in a staggering 70% of children and adolescents. Of course, fluoride also accumulates in the pineal gland of the brain, but we'll get to that momentarily. Knowing this, the argument that, oh, it's just a little bit of fluoride is completely irrelevant because it's not a one and done dose. The more fluoride you are exposed to, regardless of the dose, the more it builds up in your body. It is a cumulative poison.
Well, fluoride is real simple. It's not going to do any damage. Definitely not crazy. No, fluoride, it's legal. It's good for you.
Now that we got some of the general principles of fluoride research down, I want to take a step back so we can really get a big picture understanding of how it affects the body. In order to understand how a substance can harm us, we must first understand what creates good health to begin with. Dr. Douglas C. Wallace eloquently laid down a framework which I wholeheartedly agree with, when he stated, "The organizing power of energy flow is hypothesized to be the origin of biological complexity, and its decline the basis of complex diseases and aging. In health, our energy production is sophisticated and efficient, which supports our structure and vice versa. When one of these becomes compromised, it results in the familiar phenomena of disease and aging. This is particularly important in our most energy and structure-dependent organ, the organ that makes us humans more complex than other species, our brains. And you can help your brain with a nutrient-dense diet using Shire. If you've ever tried to buy high-quality food from a real local farmer, you know that it can be pretty tough. Are there any farms near you? What farming methods do they use? Are they even still open? Shire is here to answer these questions for you. On Shire, you can find all the farms that are either near you or do local delivery in your area. Simply head up to shireapp.io and enter your location to get started. The project is in its early stages and rapidly growing. If you'd like to help them out, feel free to reach out to them on Twitter or Instagram as well, links in the description. The outermost layer of the brain, the neocortex, is the newest and gives us the ability of critical thinking, creativity, language, and other advanced processes. The next layer is present in most mammals and is responsible for less advanced, but still critical systems like memory and emotion. Then we have the infamous reptilian brain, which is the most primitive, primarily responsible for vital functions and the fight or flight responses. This last one is no doubt critical for survival, but it is quite simple in comparison to the others. Energy production supports structure, and our ability to produce energy and maintain structure in the brain leads to our complexity, and the interference of these processes are degeneration. One such example is that of Alzheimer's disease. It's become popular as of late to call it type 3 diabetes, since it's primarily a problem of insufficient glucose metabolism in the brain that leads to degeneration. However, the reduction in metabolism and eventually atrophy primarily strikes the neocortex regions, those responsible for higher thinking, while the inner regions are preserved. Unfortunately, as the disease progresses, people not only lose their memory, but tend to lose many of the traits we associate with humanity, like speech and the ability to learn. Interestingly, fluoride administration has several effects that could do the same. Fluoride is able to disrupt energy production at the mitochondrial level, as it can inhibit several of the enzymes necessary for metabolism. Several reports have indicated that fluoride can induce inflammatory degenerative changes in the cerebral cortex, specifically to the cells that help regulate the metabolism of neurons. Speaking of Alzheimer's disease, fluoride also tends to cause these changes in the hippocampus, the brain region primarily responsible for memory. Others have shown that the mitochondria of the neurons in the cortex begin to abnormally concentrate in the soma and even fragment, thus becoming less able to produce energy. Mitochondria also become less efficient, producing more waste in the form of free radicals, which leads to oxidative stress. This damages the mitochondria, further perpetuating the cycle. Whenever there is oxidative stress, regardless of the culprit, inflammation tends to be right there with it in lockstep, and fluoride is no exception. A recent review of the literature describes fluoride as an endocrine disruptor of several central hormonal systems in the body. They note that these key actions of oxidative stress and inflammation tend to damage the organs and glands responsible for pumping out these chemical messengers. Above all in terms of importance and its research as it pertains to fluoride is the thyroid gland. The thyroid is the master regulator of energy utilization throughout the body, and the impairment in thyroid hormone metabolism plays a role in just about any health problem you can think of. They argue that fluoride inhibits thyroid function, as several studies have further supported this notion. One study showed a dose-dependent increase in TSH levels, a precursor thyroid hormone that when elevated indicates a problem with the thyroid gland. This makes sense given what we know about fluoride metabolism in the thyroid. To make its hormones, the thyroid gland requires the micronutrient iodide. However, since fluoride comes from the same family of elements, but it is smaller and more reactive, it tends to displace iodide, thereby impeding the gland's ability to synthesize its hormones. A lack of thyroid hormone metabolism is also a known risk factor for lower intelligence. Of course, the oxidative stress and inflammation induced by fluoride directly damage the thyroid as well, and these changes are ubiquitous when it comes to cognitive abnormalities. For example, one study showed that fluoride can induce depression in animals, and that administering an antioxidant, which doubles as an anti-inflammatory, was able to reverse these changes. Fluoride caused a drop in the energy production of this higher thinking brain region, the cortex, and also led to the death of the cells that make it up. Another study showed a decrease in proteins responsible for neuron-to-neuron communication, again in the cerebral cortex. One of these proteins is known as SYP, and its mutation is known to cause intellectual disability. This leads us down the most controversial and alarming part of fluoride research. Let's begin with the pineal gland. Many ancient civilizations believed the pineal gland to be responsible for consciousness and deeper thinking, claiming it was our metaphorical third eye. Today, it's understood that the pineal gland primarily produces melatonin, which is both important for sleep and has many neuroprotective, anti-inflammatory, and antioxidant properties. Oh yeah, it also produces DMT.
It's all that pineal gland shit is not proven. They don't know that DMT comes in.
I can't handle anymore.
They
do now. Yeah, they do now.
Really?
The Cottonwood Research Foundation, they did a series of tests with rats, and they proved that live rats have DMT produced by the pineal gland.
Really?
Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that humans do too, but they're pretty sure they do.
Did you like?
They also know that your lungs produce it and your liver produces it. That's a fact.
Really?
So your body's producing DMT, 100%.
Fluoride is well known to calcify the pineal gland, a degenerative change in this brain region which inhibits its ability to produce the protective melatonin from its precursor, serotonin. It's also been shown that fluoride administration to animals increases serotonin levels, and the same is observed in humans exposed to water fluoridation. Be sure to check out our video on the wonders of serotonin if you're curious on this topic. Serotonin decreases energy production in the brain. This tends to cause lethargy and brain fog, whereas serotonin's opposing neurotransmitter, dopamine, produces motivation and energy. Of course, having less melatonin and more serotonin also results in worse sleep, which is associated with fluoride exposure. Pineal gland dysfunction resulting in low melatonin, sleep disturbances, low dopamine, and high serotonin is related to multiple mental disorders such as ADHD, autism spectrum disorders, and Alzheimer's disease. One study looked at fluoride concentrations in Scotland in relation to Alzheimer's disease and found that those consuming the most had nearly 3 times the risk of developing this kind of dementia. This was a far higher risk than even that of aluminum. You know what the worst part is? Scotland doesn't even fluoridate their water. This was just comparing the trace amounts found in the water, which was, are you ready for this? Less than 5% the concentration that even the WHO recommends. Even crazier is that they adjusted for childhood IQ, so the effect is probably worse given what we will address shortly. The authors concluded by stating, this suggests that there may be no safe levels of these substances when it comes to dementia risk. The plot thickens when it comes to ADHD. It's commonly said that it is a condition of dopamine dysfunction, and given that fluoride is known to decrease dopamine and increase serotonin, it's a plausible candidate as a cause. Animal studies repeatedly show accumulation of fluoride in the brain, again at concentrations in the blood similar to what many people experience who drink fluoridated water. Animals who achieved this level of fluoride in the blood experienced significant cognitive changes, but the specific type of effect was determined by the time of exposure. Animals whose mothers were exposed to fluoride in the womb exhibited hyperactive traits, while animals drinking fluoride after being born were characterized as having cognitive deficits. ADD and ADHD seem to parallel the two behaviors of the animals given fluoride. Perhaps unsurprisingly, these conditions were relatively rare prior to widespread water and product fluoridation in the 40s and 50s. One study found a tight correlation between water fluoridation prevalence with ADHD diagnoses. The prevalence of ADHD has continued to rise over the years, so in order to control for a potential time effect, the analysis was done in 3 separate years, each 4 years apart. While the ADHD prevalence did increase over the years, regardless of fluoride, the fluoride prevalence within each year was still highly predictive of ADHD. Another study in humans is even more alarming. Subjects were given 0, 1, 100, or 500 parts per million of fluoride sublingually and tested for cognitive function thereafter. I'll let the authors be the judge. Subjects who received concentrated doses of fluoride appear to suffer from what might be termed tunnel vision, paying more attention to the lights on the left of their visual field. They know that this was a dose-dependent response, more fluoride, worse performance. After hypothesizing a few mechanisms at play, they go on to state, again, all of this is speculation. What is not speculation is the fact that 2 chemicals found in municipal waters, sodium fluoride and nitrate, produce reliable changes in sensory motor performance. It is worth noting that individuals also absorb fluoride when they brush their teeth. Well, that's okay, because they gave people an insane 500 parts per million of fluoride, whereas the amount in most toothpastes is only 1,000 to 1,500 parts per million. Animal studies have consistently shown impaired learning, cognition, and memory when exposed to fluoride. This brings us to the most widely discussed issue when discussing water fluoridation, its effect on IQ. Now, I'm of the belief that it's impossible to judge someone's intelligence solely off of these exams, and they shouldn't be taken as gospel as some would like. However, on a population level, it should give us a pretty good proxy for cognitive function. Multiple studies have examined the difference in IQ scores for developing children, and the results are pretty consistent. One 2012 review pulled together 27 studies looking at this question, and all of them found decreases in relative IQ, resulting in an overall decrease of just about 7 IQ points for living in a fluoridated area relative to a non-poisoned one. Yes, I did say 7. This study has of course been criticized heavily over the years by the pro-fluoridation crowd, but they've been misrepresenting it. In 2018, the New York Times ran an article discussing the study and claimed it only lowered IQ by 0.45 points, linking to this YouTube video. I guess they didn't know that it was not a lowering of 0.45 points, but of 0.45 standard deviations, and given that a standard deviation of IQ is 15, that means a drop of 6.75 points. Since then, at least 15 more studies have looked at the question, and once again, all of them showed a negative association between intelligence metrics and fluoride exposure. Dental fluorosis is also a great indicator of decreased IQ, and let me remind you that over 70% of children and adolescents in the United States suffer from this condition. Critics of these studies also like to say that the amount of fluoride is too high to be relevant in the Western world.
I love this. Well, first of all,
the vast majority of these studies are looking at fluoride levels that are under the APA or WHO's limits. For example, one study looked at children's intelligence in 2 different villages in China. They looked at their parents' education level, but they were the same between them. They also looked at average family income, but that was the same too. You know what wasn't the same?
You know what? I'm about to say it.
It was the fluoride. They showed a dose-dependent decrease in IQ going from 0.36 parts per million to 4.16 parts per million of fluoride, with the mean IQ dropping over 20 points. 20 points. Let me remind you that the United States' EPA sets the limit at 4.0 parts per million, and that the Scotland study showed dose-dependent increases in dementia risk at well under 0.36 parts per million. They also showed a significantly higher proportion of intellectual disability with increasing fluoride concentrations. Another study looked at prenatal exposure to fluoridated water, and the offspring exhibited a dose-dependent decrease in IQ score. For every half part per million increase in urinary fluoride concentration, a 2.5-point decrease in IQ was predicted. Keep in mind that in North America, the average urinary fluoride for pregnant women is around 1 part per million, but many can have concentrations at well above 2 parts per million, some even getting up to 4 parts per million. Imagine a 10-point decrease in IQ for your child just because the government wants to dump industrial waste into your water and then tell you it's harmless. Remember, the IQ scale is not linear, so if you go from an average IQ of 100 to an IQ of 90, that means a quarter of the population leapfrogged your intelligence.
Well, that was easy.
A 2020 paper looked at a large group of Canadian infants, and this is significant because this country's so-called optimal level of fluoride is just 0.7 parts per million, less than half of what even the WHO recommends. Even this level of fluoride exposure for mothers was associated with a near 10-point drop in performance IQ in their children if they were fed formula with tap water. Public health organizations such as the CDC, American Dental Association, and U.S. Department of Health and Human Services all recommend reconstituting infant formula with this level of optimally fluoridated water. Finally, several analyses have sought to answer the question of how much fluoride could we have in the water without suffering a loss of IQ, with them agreeing that a conservative estimate would put the limit at just above 0.2 parts per million. Considering this, we may be underestimating how much damage fluoride is causing, because there are limited studies analyzing fluoride levels this low. I suspect that the optimal amount of fluoride intake for everyone is absolutely none. So say what you will. Correlation isn't causation, we need more studies, the data is low quality, whatever. How many more studies will it take if 40 showing a decrease in IQ isn't convincing enough? Truth be told, it'll never be enough for those who don't think it's harmful. Honestly, I get it. It's hard to admit that massive amounts of people have had their potential robbed while big business, media, academia, and government continue to lie. You might not be suffering from Alzheimer's or depression or ADHD or autism as a result of fluoride poisoning, but that's just a part of the issue. Unfortunately, chronic health problems are so common nowadays that many people don't even realize they have them. How many people today have had their development significantly altered due to this? How many people today are walking around at a lower level of consciousness, relying on their reptilian brains? How many more will suffer the consequences? And how will our progression as a species be affected? Don't let them fool you. Subscribe to our channel.
That fluoride in the water thing is so sketchy. Have you ever looked into whether or not fluoride should be in the water?